Some moments are like lightning on a dark night. They illuminate everything, changing the landscape in an instant. This is a story about one of those moments. It is about a silent waitress in an upscale restaurant, a billionaire whose wealth was only matched by his arrogance, and a torrent of barbed words uttered in a language he thought was his secret weapon. His intention was to humiliate her, to put her in her place. He assumed she was insignificant, but he was about to learn that the deepest stories are often hidden in the quietest people, and that a single, perfectly spoken sentence can be more powerful than all the money in the world. Lavelle Pak was a restaurant that sold nostalgia as its main course. Located on a cobblestone side street in Boston's historic district, it was an island of old-world charm in a sea of gleaming glass towers. Its owner, a kind and perpetually worried man named Marco Cleet, insisted on real tablecloths, fresh flowers on every table, and a staff that valued discretion above all else. The clientele was the city's elite, old money, political power brokers, and new titans of wealth who came to feel part of something special. Amelia Sterling was a ghost in this gilded cage. At her age, she moved with an economy of motion that spoke of years of practice. She was efficient, observant, and almost completely invisible, just as she liked it. Her uniform, an immaculate black blouse and pants, was her armor. Her reserved demeanor was her shield. Most customers saw her as another part of the decor, a functional piece of the elegant machinery that brought them their sealed vintages and aged Bordeaux. They did not see the charcoal smudges she always had under her fingernails, no matter how much she scrubbed them. They did not see the fatigue behind her hazel eyes, a weariness that came not just from working double shifts, but from the weight of a life lived before this one. Did they not know that in her small, sparsely furnished apartment, building sketches covered every inch of the walls? They were not modern skyscrapers, but detailed and loving renditions of ancient arch, intricate courtyards, and majestic public squares, reconstructions of a city thousands of miles away, a city she could now only visit in her memory. She was not just a waitress. She was an architecture student at the city college, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a burning, desperate need to rebuild what had been lost. That particular Tuesday night, the air buzzed with the low hum of expensive conversations. A storm was brewing outside, and the warm, dim light of the restaurant felt like a sanctuary. Amelia glided between tables, refilling water glasses and clearing plates, her mind partially occupied with a complicated structural engineering problem she was tackling for her mid-semester project. Then he walked in. Samuel Calloway was not a man who merely entered a room. He conquered it. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Amelia's entire semester's tuition, he radiated an aura of raw, predatory power. He was a real estate magnate, a corporate raider, a man who saw cities not as places where people lived, but as chessboards on which to build his empire. He was accompanied by two younger men, Leo Martinez and Richard Powell, both looking nervous and eager to please like jackals in a lion's orbit. Mr. Cleet greeted them personally, his usual warmth replaced by palpable attentiveness. Amelia, from her vantage point at the service station, knew why. Calloway's company, Calloway Global, had recently bought the entire block, including the historic building housing Lavelle Pak. The eviction notice, drafted in cold corporate legal language, was pinned to the kitchen bulletin board. For months, Mr. Cleet had been fighting it, arguing that the restaurant was a landmark, a part of the city's soul. To Calloway, it was just an outdated structure on land earmarked for a new 50-story luxury tower. "To the corner booth," he ordered, not asked, "and bring your finest bottle of whiskey. We're celebrating a victory." Mr. Cleet's face darkened, but he nodded and led them to the best table in the house. Amelia was assigned to their section. Her stomach tightened. She took a deep breath, smoothed her apron, and walked towards the lion's den. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I start you with some water?" she asked, her voice calm and even. Calloway didn't even look at her. He was busy scrolling through something on his phone. "Just bring the whiskey," he snapped, waving a dismissive hand. Richard Powell, the more fawning of the two associates, smirked. "The man said the finest bottle. Honey, don't bring us something cheap." Amelia simply nodded. "Of course, sir." For the next hour, she served them with impeccable professionalism. She maintained her composure as Calloway loudly reprimanded a subordinate over the phone. About a deal in Dubai, his voice cutting through the restaurant's subdued ambiance. She ignored the condescending way Richard ordered his food as if speaking to a child. Leo, the other associate, was quieter, casting Amelia occasional glances that seemed to betray a hint of sympathy before quickly looking away, unwilling to cross his boss. The tension at the table revolved around Calloway. He was restless, agitated, a man accustomed to constant motion, for whom the simple act of sitting to eat was an annoyance. He treated the restaurant and its staff as an extension of his will. When his steak was not cooked exactly to his liking, he sent it back without a word, simply pushing the plate to the edge of the table with a look of disgust. Amelia handled everything with the same placid efficiency. She had dealt with difficult customers before. She had faced much worse things in her life than a rich man's temper. She was like a stone in a river, letting the current of his arrogance wash over her. The fateful moment arrived with the coffee. The storm had broken, and rain now lashed against the windows. Calloway was in the midst of a diatribe about the bureaucracy delaying his new tower, the very one that would replace this restaurant. He gesticulated wildly, his hand slicing through the air. Amelia approached to refill his coffee cup, moving carefully. As always, more coffee, Mr. Calloway. He either didn't hear her or didn't care. As she leaned in with the coffee pot, his hand shot out in a frustrated gesture. It collided with her arm. The pot tilted, and the dark, hot liquid spilled onto the table, splattering the pristine white tablecloth and, most critically, a stack of architectural blueprints he had just unrolled. A sudden, deadly silence fell over the table. The restaurant's low hum seemed to fade into nothingness. Calloway stared at the brown stains spreading across his blueprints. His face, which had been red with anger, paled with fury. Slowly, he lifted his gaze from the ruined papers to Amelia. His eyes were like chips of ice. Richard Powell gasped. "Clumsy girl, do you have any idea what you've done?" Amelia's heart pounded against her ribs, but her face remained impassive. "I'm so sorry, sir. It was an accident." Calloway pushed his chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. He stood up, towering over her. The entire restaurant was now watching. He didn't raise his voice. He did something far crueler. He lowered his voice, making his venom more personal, more intimate. He leaned towards her, his expression twisted into a sneer. He assumed, like most people, that a waitress in a Boston restaurant would be just another American. He decided to use a language he had learned during his ruthless dealings in the Middle East, a language he used to boast, to dominate, to draw a line between himself and insignificant people. He switched to Arabic. The words were guttural, sharp, and dripped with contempt. "Street dog, you are nothing. At least animals have a purpose, but you are nothing but a waste of air." He had called her a street dog. He had told her she was nothing, that at least animals have a purpose, but she was merely a waste of air. It was a viciously, deeply personal insult designed to shatter the dignity of someone he believed couldn't understand him. He smiled a cold, triumphant sneer, expecting to see confusion, perhaps fear, in her eyes. He straightened up, ready to demand Mr. Cleet fire her on the spot. He had delivered his final, crushing blow. But Amelia did not look confused. She did not look scared. For the first time all night, the mask of the invisible waitress slipped. Her posture changed. She stood taller, her spine stiffening as if forged from steel. She lifted her chin, and her hazel eyes met his directly. The fatigue in them had vanished, replaced by a fire that seemed to burn away years of silent suffering. An instant of silence passed, and then she responded. The Arabic Samuel Calloway had spoken was functional, the kind a foreigner learns in a boardroom to intimidate and impress. It was clipped, modern, and carried the harsh accent of someone who had memorized words without ever understanding their soul. The Arabic Amelia Sterling spoke in return was like poetry. It flowed from her not as a learned language, but as a mother tongue imbued with the soft melodic cadence of the Levant. It was the dialect of scholars and poets, the ancient lyrical Arabic of her native Aleppo, a city known for its culture long before it became famous for its ruins. She did not shout. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the restaurant's silence with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Amelia replied to him in impeccable lyrical Arabic, her tone calm but cutting. "The street dogs you speak of, sir, are more loyal than men who forget their hearts are not merely blood pumps." The words hung in the air, intricate and devastating. Samuel Calloway's smile froze on his face. His eyes widened, the icy confidence draining from them to be replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. His two associates, Richard and Leo, looked back and forth between him and Amelia, their faces masks of confusion. They did not understand the words, but they comprehended the seismic shift of power that had just occurred. Amelia had told him, with stunning fluency, that street dogs were more loyal than men who forget their hearts are not just muscles to pump blood. She was not finished. She held his gaze, her own eyes unwavering. She continued, still speaking in Arabic. Perhaps you should spend less time building glass towers and more time looking in the mirror. You might be frightened by the emptiness that stares back at you. Every syllable was perfect. Every intonation was laden with a meaning that went far beyond the literal translation. She had taken his crude insult and turned it back on him, not with equal vulgarity, but with profound, cutting elegance. She had exposed his spiritual poverty with the very language he had attempted to use as a weapon. Samuel Calloway, for the first time in his adult life, was speechless. It was as if she had reached into his chest and momentarily stopped his heart. He, a man who built his empire with words, threats, negotiations, and commands, had no words. He could only stare at this waitress, this nobody who had completely and utterly dismantled him. Who was she? Where did this come from? His mind raced, trying to process the impossible. The fluency, the accent. It was not something learned in a college class. It was lived. It was breathed. It was the sound of a home he had only visited to plunder. The spell broke when Mr. Cleet rushed to the table. "Mr. Calloway, Amelia, what is going on here? Is everything all right?" Amelia's gaze finally broke from Calloway's. She turned to her boss, and the fire in her eyes softened into a tired, familiar resolve. The ghost was back, but changed. "Everything is fine, Marco," she said in English, her voice steady. "There was a spill. I was just apologizing to the gentleman." Apologizing. The word seemed absurd. She had just performed a verbal execution, and she was calling it an apology. Calloway found his voice, but it was harsh, unfamiliar. "Get my coat," he told Richard, his eyes still fixed on Amelia. "But Samuel, the deal. We were going to—" Richard stammered. Now Calloway's voice was a low growl. Richard and Leo awkwardly stood, fumbling for their jackets. Calloway continued to stare at Amelia. It was no longer a gaze of arrogance or anger. It was something entirely different, a bewildered, inquisitive look, as if trying to see past her uniform and reach the very core of her being. He dropped a few $100 bills onto the table, far more than the check, but it was not a tip. It felt like a retreat, a surrender. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the restaurant, his associates following like bewildered pilot fish. The heavy oak door closed behind them, leaving a deep, resonant silence in their wake. The restaurant remained frozen for a moment. All eyes were on Amelia. She stood by the stained tablecloth, coffee pot in hand, looking small and yet somehow larger than anyone else in the room. Then, an older man in a tweed jacket sitting at a nearby table began to clap. It was slow, deliberate. It was Dr. Alistair Albright, a retired Harvard professor of Middle Eastern Studies and a regular Lavelle Pioch patron for 20 years. He had understood every word of the exchange. His applause was soon joined by other patrons, a scattered, hesitant sound at first, then growing into a warm wave of support. Amelia looked around, bewildered, color rising to her cheeks. This was the opposite of the invisibility she craved. She felt exposed, vulnerable. She gave a small, trembling nod to the room. Then she quickly turned and fled to the relative refuge of the kitchen, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. In the kitchen, the staff buzzed with questions. "What did you say to him, Maria?" another waitress asked, wide-eyed. "I've never seen anyone shut a guy up like that." Amelia leaned against the cool stainless steel counter, breathing deeply. She couldn't explain it. She couldn't tell them that for a fleeting moment she wasn't Amelia Sterling, the waitress. She was Amira al-Jamil, the daughter of Khaled al-Jamil, Aleppo's most respected architect. She was the girl who had grown up listening to her father recite the poetry of al-Mutanabi while sketching designs for new libraries and restoring ancient mosques. The language Calloway had used as a weapon was the language of her lullabies, of her father's wisdom, of her lost home. When he had twisted it into something ugly, he had not just insulted her, he had desecrated a memory. And for the first time since she had fled her war-torn country, the silent, broken part of her had roared back to life. But as the adrenaline faded, a cold dread began to seep in. She had not just talked back to a rude customer, she had publicly humiliated Samuel Calloway, a man who bulldozed whatever and whoever stood in his way, a man who held the fate of Mr. Cleet's restaurant, his sole source of income, in the palm of his hand. She had won the battle of words, but she was terrified. She had just started a war she could never hope to win. The world outside Lavelle Pioch moved at light speed. Samuel Calloway had assumed his private, cruel insult would be a contained explosion, a momentary reassertion of power. He failed to account for the omnipresent eyes and ears of the 21st century. At a small table near the window, a young tech entrepreneur had been dining with his girlfriend. He didn't understand the Arabic, but he recognized raw drama when he saw it. The tense atmosphere, the billionaire's scowling face, the waitress's sudden, powerful transformation. It was captivating. Discreetly, he had begun recording on his phone just as Calloway leaned in to deliver his insult. He captured the entire exchange. The ugly Arabic, Amelia's lyrical and astonishing reply, Calloway's stunned expression, and the professor's final, satisfying applause. He hadn't even paid his check before uploading it. He gave it a simple, clickable title, Arrogant Billionaire Humiliated in Fluent Arabic by Boston Waitress. He tagged several local news outlets and gossip blogs. Then he went back to his dessert. By the time Amelia finished her shift, wiping down the last tables and helping Mr. Cleet lock up, the video was no longer a spark, it was a wildfire. It spread across Twitter, was shared tens of thousands of times on Facebook, and became the top post on Reddit's public freakout and justice-served forums. People were captivated. Arabic-speaking commenters quickly provided translations, and with each translation, the story grew. Calloway's crude insult was laid bare for the world to see, contrasted with the poetic, devastating grace of Amelia's reply. She became an overnight folk hero. They didn't know her name, so they gave her one, the Aleppo Waitress. The moniker began to trend. People lauded her bravery, her dignity, her intelligence. They marveled at the sheer, genuine artistry of her retort. Memes were created. The image of her calm face opposite Calloway's stunned expression became a symbol of quiet defiance against arrogant power. Amelia knew nothing of this. She walked home through the rain-slicked streets, her mind replaying the encounter over and over. She was torn between pride and terror. Pride was a forgotten feeling, a warm ember from a life she thought extinguished. Terror was all too familiar. She worried for Mr. Cleet. She worried for her job, her tuition, her fragile, carefully constructed new life. She reached her small apartment. The scent of turpentine and old paper was a comfort. She switched on her laptop to work on her mid-semester project, but her mind was too scattered. On an impulse, she opened a browser and typed in Level Pas. The search results hit her like a physical blow. Her face, or rather a blurry, pixelated version of it from the video, was everywhere. News headlines screamed at her. Who is the mysterious waitress who put Samuel Calloway in his place? Boston billionaire's Arabic insult turned back on him in viral video. The Aleppo Waitress, a story of grace under pressure. She clicked on the video, her hand trembling. She watched the scene unfold from a stranger's perspective. She heard her own voice speaking the language of her childhood, and a wave of deep sadness and longing washed over her. She heard her father's voice in her own cadence. She saw her mother's strength in her posture. The video was only a minute long, but it contained her entire story. Her phone vibrated. It was Mr. Cleet. Amelia, are you seeing this? His voice was tight with panic. Yes, Marco, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. It's not your fault, kiddo, he said, though his tone betrayed his fear. You did what anyone with dignity would have done. But Samuel Calloway isn't a man who forgives. He isn't a man who forgets. This is bad. I got an email from his lawyers an hour ago. They're terminating our lease. The grace period is void. We have 30 days to vacate. The floor seemed to vanish beneath her. 30 days? But that's illegal. Your contract... Calloway has the best lawyers money can buy, Amelia. They found a loophole, a technicality. It doesn't matter if it's legal. By the time I fight it in court, we'll be out. He's not just demolishing the building now. He's punishing us. He's punishing me because of you. The words, though not meant to be cruel, pierced her heart. She was the cause. Her moment of defiance had cost this kind man his livelihood, his life's work. Her friends' jobs, Maria, the cooks, the dishwashers, all gone because of her. The guilt was crushing, heavier than any insult Calloway could have hurled at her. Meanwhile, in his penthouse overlooking the city, Samuel Calloway watched the same video, but felt no guilt. He felt a rage so pure and cold it was almost sublime. It wasn't the insult that bothered him. It was the loss of control, the public humiliation. He had spent a lifetime cultivating an image of untouchable power, and in 60 seconds, a nameless waitress had shattered it. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. His PR team was in full panic mode. The board of directors was demanding an explanation. A major investor from Abu Dhabi, a man whose respect he had worked years to earn, sent him a one-line text. This is not how strong men behave. Find her, he ordered his head of personal security, a formidable man named Carter. I don't mean her name on the restaurant payroll. I want to know everything, where she was born, where she studied, what she had for breakfast. I want to know who gave her the right To look at me that way? Find out everything, Carter. Carter, a man accustomed to digging up corporate espionage and hidden financial records, nodded. It will be done, Mr. Calloway. Samuel turned back to the screen, pausing the video on Amelia's face. The defiant look in her eyes was like a personal challenge. He was a man who raised buildings, crushed competitors, and redesigned city skylines. He would not be defeated by a waitress. He would find her, and he would use the information to crush her, to reassert his dominance. He would show that in his world, people like her did not get the last word. The digital fire was burning now, but he would be the one to control the ashes. Carter was brutally efficient. As a former intelligence analyst, he moved through the digital and physical world with silent, surgical precision. To him, uncovering Amelia Sterling's life was trivial. Within 24 hours, a sleek, encrypted file landed in Samuel Calloway's inbox. The subject was simple. A. Sterling, complete dossier. Samuel opened it in his sterile, glass-walled office. The city of Boston spread out beneath him like a map. He expected to find a story of mundane struggle, perhaps a second-generation immigrant, a student visa, a history of humble jobs. He was looking for an edge, a weakness, a pressure point he could use to silence her and repair his public image. What he found was a ghost story. The first page was standard information. Name, Amelia Sterling. Age, 24. Current address, an apartment building in Allston. Occupation, waitress at Lavelle Park. Student at Boston City College's School of Architecture. He paused. Architecture. A flicker of something, annoyance, surprise, passed through him. He glanced at the half-finished model of his own tower sitting in the corner of his office. He dismissed the thought and read on. The next section was her immigration history, status, political refugee, granted 5 years ago, country of origin, Syria, city of origin, Aleppo. This gave him another pause. Aleppo. The name was a headline, a tragedy he had read in the Wall Street Journal with his morning espresso, a place of rubble and dust. It explained her accent, but it didn't explain the fire in her eyes, the regal dignity. Then he clicked on the next file titled Family History, and the world tilted on its axis. The file contained scanned documents, translated birth certificates, and old newspaper clippings. Her name was not originally Amelia Sterling. It was an anglicization she had adopted for a new life. Birth name, Amira Al-Jamil. The name Al-Jamil meant nothing to him, but her father's name, which appeared next, struck him like a physical blow. Father, Dr. Khaled Al-Jamil. Occupation, architect and professor of architectural history, University of Aleppo. Samuel's blood ran cold. He leaned forward, his face inches from the screen. It couldn't be. He scrambled to open a new browser tab and typed in the name Khaled Al-Jamil. The search results were filled with academic journals, architecture publications, and UNESCO tributes. Khaled Al-Jamil was not just an architect. He was a legend, a visionary who had seamlessly combined modern structural techniques with ancient Islamic designs. He was famous for his restoration of the Great Mosque of Aleppo and his designs for public libraries and cultural centers throughout the Levant. He was a purist, a poet in stone and steel. Years ago, when Samuel was just starting out, hungry and ambitious, he had studied the work of the world's great architects. He had a secret admiration for the masters, a side of himself he never showed to his ruthless business partners. He remembered seeing a profile on Khaled Al-Jamil in an international design magazine. He had been captivated by the man's philosophy that buildings should serve the soul of a community, not just the ego of their creator. He had dismissed it at the time as naive, but the elegance of Al-Jamil's designs had stayed with him. The dossier continued, and the story grew dark. It included satellite photos and Red Cross reports. The Al-Jamil family home, a beautiful example of traditional Aleppine architecture that Khaled himself had restored, was in a neighborhood that had been hit by a barrel bomb. The report listed the casualties. Khaled Al-Jamil, deceased. Samira Al-Jamil, spouse, deceased. Kareem Al-Jamil, son, 12 years old, deceased. One survivor was listed. Amira Al-Jamil, 19 years old. She had been rescued from the rubble by neighbors. She spent 2 months in a makeshift clinic in a refugee camp before embarking on the perilous journey through Turkey, then to Europe, and finally through a UN refugee program to the United States. The final document in the file was a photograph. It was a scanned copy of an old family portrait. A smiling man with kind, intelligent eyes, Khaled Al-Jamil, stood with his arm around a beautiful woman. In front of them was a young boy kicking a soccer ball, and a teenage girl with long, dark hair and the same hazel eyes that had confronted him in the restaurant. She was smiling, full of a light and life he hadn't seen. She held a sketchbook and a pencil. Samuel Calloway leaned back in his leather chair. The silence of his office pressed in on him. The air seemed thin, difficult to breathe. He felt a cold, hollow sensation spread through his chest. This was no waitress. This was the sole survivor of a lineage of genius. This was the daughter of a man he had, in a secret professional corner of his soul, admired. He had stood over this woman, this orphan who had lost everything, and called her a street dog. He had mocked her as a waste of air in the same language her father had probably used to teach her about poetry and beauty. The blueprints of his tower, stained with the coffee she had spilled, were still on his credenza. He looked at them, the sharp lines, the cold glass, the towering, sterile structure designed to scream his own name to the sky. For the first time, he saw it through other eyes. He imagined what Khalid al-Jamil would think of it. He imagined what Amira al-Jamil, Amelia Sterling, would think of it. You might be frightened by the emptiness that stares back at you. Her words echoed in his mind, no longer an insult but a prophecy. He was looking at his life, his empire, his tower, and he saw the emptiness, the absolute and profound lack of soul. The rage was gone, the need for revenge had evaporated. In its place was something deeply unsettling, something he hadn't felt in decades. Shame. He had wanted to find a weakness, a pressure point to destroy her. Instead, he had found a story of unimaginable strength in a mirror that showed him the poverty of his own character. He had set out to crush a ghost, and the ghost had turned around and shown him that he was the truly haunted one. His plan for revenge was now in ashes, but he had no idea what to build in its place. The viral video and the subsequent public humiliation of Samuel Calloway had an unintended consequence. They brought Amelia's story to the attention of Dr. Alistair Albright, the Harvard professor who had started the applause in the restaurant. He had been spellbound by the exchange, by the purity of her Aleppine dialect. He sought her out. He found her not at the now-shuttered Lavelle Park, but in the City College library, bent over a drafting table, her face illuminated by the glow of a lamp. She looked exhausted, but resolute. He gently introduced himself, speaking a few words in the same classical Arabic she had used. Amelia's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. "I was there that night," he explained in English. "I'm a retired professor of Middle Eastern history. What you did, the dignity you showed, was extraordinary." Hesitantly, Amelia began to speak. For the first time since coming to America, she told someone her story, not the sanitized refugee version, but the real one. She spoke of her father, his work, her dream of following in his footsteps, and the crushing guilt she now felt over the fate of Lavelle Park. Dr. Albright listened, his expression growing graver with each word. "Amelia," he said finally, his voice firm, "you have nothing to feel guilty for. A man like Calloway is a force of nature, like a hurricane. You just happened to be in his path, but you did not break." He paused. "Your father, Khaled al-Jamil, was a great man. His loss was a loss to the entire world. His work should not be forgotten. Your work should not be forgotten." Inspired and emboldened by her story, Dr. Albright made some calls. He was retired, but his name still carried immense weight. He spoke to a Boston Globe reporter, a former student of his known for her in-depth, compassionate reporting. He contacted the city's Historical Landmarks Commission. He didn't just tell them about a waitress who was wronged. He told them the story of Amira al-Jamil, inheritor of an architectural legacy, and how the last vestige of her new life was about to be demolished by the very man who had insulted her heritage. The narrative began to shift. The story was no longer just about a rude billionaire. It became a story about culture, history, and preservation. It was David versus Goliath, but now David had a backstory that resonated with the entire city. Protests, small at first, began to form outside the boarded-up Lavelle Park. Students from Amelia's college joined, holding signs that read, "Boston's soul is not for sale," and "Build bridges, not towers." The Historical Commission, under public pressure, announced an emergency review of the building's landmark status, a move that would temporarily halt any demolition permits. Samuel Calloway found himself in an entirely new kind of war. It wasn't a corporate takeover he could win with hostile bids and backroom deals. It was a battle for public opinion, and he was losing catastrophically. The architect's daughter's story was far more compelling than the aggrieved billionaire's. His attempts at damage control, a sterile, lawyer-approved apology issued by his PR firm, were met with ridicule and scorn. His investors were getting nervous. The Calloway Tower project was now mired in bad press and bureaucratic delays. His brand, once synonymous with power and success, was becoming synonymous with bullying and cultural vandalism. He sat in his office, the dossier on Amelia still open on his computer. He had two choices. He could double down, use his army of lawyers to crush the opposition, fight the city, and eventually build his monument to emptiness. He would win eventually, he always did, but the victory would be hollow, built on a foundation of public hatred and his own private shame. Or he could do something else, something he had never done before. He could cede control. He could admit defeat. He looked at the photo of the smiling Al-Jamil family. He looked at the teenage girl with the sketchbook. He thought of her in the library, drawing buildings from memory while he sat in his glass tower counting his money. His phone rang. It was Leo Martinez, his quieter, more observant partner. "Sir," Leo said, his voice hesitant, "I've been following the news. This isn't going away." "What's your point, Leo?" Samuel snapped, his old impatience resurfacing. "My point, sir, is that perhaps we're looking at this the wrong way. We're trying to silence her. Maybe we should be listening to her." It was a brave thing to say, and Leo knew he was risking his career. Samuel was silent for a long moment. The old him would have fired Leo on the spot for such insubordination, but the old him hadn't been so thoroughly dissected by a few lines of poetry. "Get the car, Leo," Samuel said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual arrogance. "We're going for a drive, and find out where I can find Amelia Sterling, not to send her legal documents, to talk." Leo was stunned. "Yes, sir. Immediately, sir." As Samuel stood, his eyes fell once more on the tower model. He walked over to it, this monument to his own ego. He looked at its sterile lines, its soulless ambition, and with a sudden, decisive sweep of his arm, he sent the multi-million-dollar model crashing to the floor in a shower of shattered plastic and broken dreams. He didn't look back at the wreckage. He was going to build something new. Finding Amelia wasn't difficult. Dr. Albright had become a protective figure in her life. And when Leo Martinez called, explaining Mr. Calloway wished to speak with her in person, the old professor was skeptical. "He won't harass her," Leo insisted. "This isn't about intimidation. I give you my word, he wants to meet on neutral ground. You choose." After a long conversation with Amelia, who was both terrified and strangely resolute, a meeting was arranged. The place she chose was not a lawyer's office or a boardroom, but the main courtyard of the Boston Public Library, an open, peaceful space, itself an architectural masterpiece, surrounded by elegant arches and the quiet rustle of turning pages. Amelia arrived first, sitting on a stone bench near the fountain. She clutched her worn sketchbook to her chest like a shield. When Samuel Calloway arrived, he was alone, no partners, no bodyguards. He wasn't wearing his usual power suit, but a simple, dark sweater and trousers. He looked smaller somehow, without the armor of his wealth. He stopped a few feet from her, hands in his pockets. The city's bustle seemed to fade. "Miss Sterling," he began, his voice low. "Amira." Hearing him say her true name startled her. It was both intimate and unsettling. "Thank you for meeting me," he continued. He didn't offer a handshake. He seemed to know it wouldn't be well received. "The things I said to you, the apology my lawyers wrote, none of it is enough. It was despicable. There is no excuse." Amelia watched him, her expression unreadable. She said nothing, simply waiting. "I didn't just look up your name," he confessed, dropping his gaze to the stone ground for a moment. "I looked up everything, your family, your father." He looked at her again, his eyes holding a new, raw honesty. "I knew his work years ago. I admired it. He was a true artist. What happened to him, to your family, is a tragedy beyond words." Amelia's knuckles were white where she gripped her sketchbook. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. This man had no claim to her grief. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "So I'll feel sorry for you?" "No," he said quickly. "So you'll understand. The man who said those things to you in the restaurant was a product of a world your father's work stood against, a world of ego, of demolition, of forgetting the past. When you answered me, you reminded me." He took another step closer. "My tower, the project, I've canceled it." Amelia's eyes widened in disbelief. "You canceled it? What about the restaurant? Mr. Cleet?" "The building will not be demolished. I've already contacted Mr. Cleet's lawyer. I am reinstating his lease indefinitely, and I am personally paying for the damages my legal threats have caused his business. The Historical Commission can stand down." This was more than she had ever hoped for. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made her dizzy washed over her. Marco was safe. Her friends' jobs were safe. But she was still wary. A man like this did not simply give up. "Why?" she asked, the single word hanging in the air. "Because," Samuel said, "I want to build something else, something better, and I can't do it without you." He reached into his jacket and pulled out, not a legal document, but a rolled-up piece of drafting paper. He spread it on the bench between them. It was a blank site plan of the block where Lavelle Park stood. "I still own the land around the restaurant," he explained. "But I'm no longer going to build a monument to myself. I want to build a center for art and culture, a place for immigrants, for refugees, a place that celebrates the heritage of the people who make this city what it is, a place with libraries, galleries, and performance spaces, a place with gardens like those that once graced the courtyards of Aleppo." He looked at her, his expression intense. "But I am a man who builds with glass and steel. I do not know how to build with soul. Your father did. And I see his eyes when I look at you. I see his talent in the way you hold that sketchbook." He tapped the blank paper. "I am offering you a full scholarship to any architecture program in the country, MIT, Harvard, the one of your choosing. All expenses paid. And I am offering you a job, starting now, as a paid consultant on this project. I don't want you to be a waitress anymore. I want you to be an architect. Help me build something that honors his memory instead of just another empty tower." Amelia was stunned, speechless. Her mind was in a whirlwind. It was an impossible offer, a fairy tale solution born from a nightmare. Was it a trap, a way to appropriate her story and salvage his reputation? She searched his face for any sign of deception, but saw only deep fatigue and a flicker of desperate hope. She thought of her father. He believed that architecture could heal, that buildings could be bridges between cultures, between past and future. He wouldn't have wanted her to be defined by bitterness and anger. He would have wanted her to build. Slowly, she uncrossed her fingers from her sketchbook. She opened it to a page she had been working on the night before. It wasn't a memory of Aleppo. It was a new design, a concept for a modern public library, but with a soaring central atrium designed like a traditional Syrian courtyard, complete with geometric arches and a fountain at its heart. It was a fusion of her past and her present. She slid the sketchbook across the bench to him. Samuel looked at the drawing. He saw the elegant lines, the thoughtful use of light and space, the deep respect for history blended with a bold vision for the future. He saw the soul of Khaled al-Jamil refined and reborn in his daughter's hands. A slow smile, the first genuine one Amelia had seen from him, touched his lips. "Yes," he breathed, his voice filled with awe. "Something exactly like this." Amelia looked from her sketch to the powerful man beside her, and for the first time, she did not see an enemy. She saw a partner. She saw a chance. A chance not just to rebuild the ruins of her memory, but to construct a future she had never dared to imagine. "All right, Mr. Calloway," her voice clear and strong. "Let's get to work." News of the partnership between Samuel Calloway and Amelia Sterling sent shockwaves through the city, far greater than the initial viral video. It was a story of redemption, collaboration, and hope that eclipsed the simple narrative of conflict. The project was officially announced at a press conference held, fittingly, at the reopened and bustling Lavelle Park, with a beaming Marco Cleet looking on. It was named the Al-Jamil Center for Cultural Heritage. The next few years were a whirlwind for Amelia. She accepted the scholarship to the prestigious MIT School of Architecture and Planning, but her education wasn't confined to the classroom. She worked side by side with Samuel and a team of world-class architects he assembled. At first, their dynamic was cautious. Samuel, humbled and transformed, learned to listen. He had spent his life dictating terms. Now he learned to ask questions. He watched, fascinated, as Amelia, now Amira, as her friends and colleagues called her, commanded a room, not with volume, but with quiet, unshakable competence. She advocated for materials, for designs, for public spaces with a passion that came from a place he was only beginning to understand. She fought for every arch, every courtyard, every detail that would make the center a place of welcome and refuge, not just a building. Amira, in turn, learned from him. She learned the practical language of zoning laws, budgets, and engineering logistics. He taught her how to navigate the ruthless world of construction, while she taught him that the true value of a building could not be measured in square footage or rental income. They forged an unlikely yet powerful alliance, built on a shared goal and hard-earned mutual respect. Leo Martinez, the partner who had advised Samuel to listen, was promoted to oversee the project, his compassionate instincts finally rewarded. Richard Powell, unable to adapt to the company's new ethos, quietly resigned. Dr. Albright was appointed to the center's board of directors, ensuring its mission always remained true to its founding principles. On a crisp autumn day, 5 years after their fateful encounter, the Al Jamil Center opened its doors to the public. It was a breathtaking piece of architecture. It did not tear at the sky like the tower Samuel had once envisioned. Instead, it embraced the street. Its facade of pale limestone and warm wood was intricately carved with geometric patterns reminiscent of ancient Syrian art. Lavelle Park was seamlessly integrated into its corner, its old-world charm preserved and celebrated. The heart of the center was the vast sunlit atrium Amira had first sketched in her notebook. A fountain bubbled peacefully in its center. The sound of water was a soothing balm. Galleries branched off, showcasing the art of immigrant and refugee artists. A state-of-the-art library was filled with books in dozens of languages. A performance hall hosted musicians and poets from around the world. It was more than a building. It was a living, breathing testament to the idea that a city's greatest strength is its people and their stories. On opening day, a dedication ceremony was held in the main atrium. Amira, now a confident and serene architect, stood at the podium. She looked out at the diverse crowd, at Marco Cleet, wiping a tear from his eye, at Dr. Albright, beaming with pride, and at Samuel Calloway, standing not in the spotlight, but quietly to the side, watching her with an expression of deep respect. Buildings are not just stone and glass, Amira said, her voice resonating through the space she had designed. They are memories. They are shelters. They are stages where human life unfolds. My father taught me that an architect's role is not to impose a vision on a community, but to listen to its heart and give it physical form. This center is a testament to that belief. It is for every person who ever had to start over. It is proof that from the deepest rubble, you can always build something beautiful and new. Later that day, as the sun set, casting long shadows through the grand arches, Amira found Samuel standing by the fountain. "He would have been proud of you," Samuel said softly, "not just for this building, but for the woman you have become." Amira watched the water dance in the fading light. "He would have been surprised by you," she replied, a small, genuine smile on her face. "I think he would have liked the man you have become." The anger and pain of that night in the restaurant seemed to belong to another lifetime. It was a flash of lightning that had, in the end, illuminated a path forward for them both. One had learned to see beyond wealth and power, and the other had found a way to reclaim her voice and her heritage, not by dwelling on the past, but by building a bold and beautiful future for all. In the heart of the city, the center stood as a permanent reminder. The most powerful structures are built not on foundations of steel, but of dignity, respect, and a willingness to truly see one another. The story of Amelia Sterling and Samuel Calloway, a powerful reminder that every person we encounter carries a story we don't know. An act of arrogance, a careless insult, can be a spark that ignites a fire of destruction, or, if we are lucky, illuminates a path to profound change. This wasn't just a billionaire being put in his place. It was about two people from opposite ends of the earth finding common ground in the most unexpected way, proving that empathy is the strongest material with which we can build a better world. It's a testament to the fact that our deepest wounds can often become the source of our greatest strength. If this story moved you and reminded you to look for the hidden depths in everyone around you, please take a moment to hit the like button and share it with someone who appreciates stories of resilience and redemption. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Stories of Black Women, for more true stories that inspire, challenge, and ultimately connect us all. Thank you for listening.